You are wrong.
Welcome to the nightly reading of Bhagavad-Gita as it is. Tonight we're reading chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. One who understands the difference between the body, the soul, and the super soul beyond them, both, attains liberation from this material world. Text 1 and 2. Arjuna uvacha prakritim purusham chaiva Chaitram chaitragyameva cha etad viditum anichchami jnanam gyeyam cha Kesava. Shri Bhagavan-uvacha idam shariram kaunteya chaitram ityabhidiyate etad yo viditam prahu chaitragya iti tad vidaha. Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, and the field, and the knower of the field, and of knowledge, and the object of knowledge." The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field." Purport. Arjuna was inquisitive about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, Chaitra, the field, Chaitragya, its knower, and knowledge and the object of knowledge. When he inquired about all these, Krishna said that this body is called the field. When he inquired about all these, Krishna said that this body is called the field, and that one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. This body is the field of activity for the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul is entrapped in material existence, and he attempts to lord it over material nature. And so, according to his capacity to dominate material nature, he gets a field of activity. That field of activity is the body. And what is the body? The body is made of senses. The conditioned soul wants to enjoy sense gratification, and according to his capacity to enjoy sense gratification, he is offered a body, or field of activity. Therefore the body is called Chaitra, or the field of activity for the conditioned soul. Now, the person who should not identify himself with the body is called Chaitragya, the knower of the field. It is not very difficult to understand the difference between the field and its knower, the body and the knower of the body. Any person can consider that from childhood to old age he undergoes so many changes of body, and yet is still one person remaining. Thus there is a difference between the knower of the field of activities and the actual field of activities. A living conditioned soul can thus understand that he is different from the body. It is described in the beginning, Dehi no smin, that the living entity is within the body, and that the body is changing from childhood to boyhood, and from boyhood to youth, and from youth to old age. And the person who owns the body knows that the body is changing. The owner is distinctly Chaitragya. Sometimes we think, I am happy, I am a man, I am a woman, I am a dog, I am a cat. These are the bodily designations of the knower. But the knower is different from the body. Although we may use many articles, our clothes and so on, we know that we are different from the things used. Similarly, we also understand by a little contemplation that we are different from the body. I or you or anyone else who knows the body is called Chaitragya, the knower of the field of activities, and the body is called Chaitra, the field of activities itself. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, the knower of the body, the living entity, and the position by which he can understand the Supreme Lord are described. In the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad-Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the relationship between the individual soul and the supersoul in regard to devotional service are described. The superior position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the subordinate position of the individual soul are definitely defined in these chapters. The living entities are subordinate under all circumstances, but in their forgetfulness they are suffering. When enlightened by pious activities, they approach the Supreme Lord in different capacities, as the distressed, those in want of money, the inquisitive, and those in search of knowledge. That is also described. Now, starting with the 13th chapter, how the living entity becomes in contact with material nature, and how he is delivered by the Supreme Lord through the different methods of fruitive activities, cultivation of knowledge, and the discharge of devotional service are explained. Although the living entity is completely different from the material body, he somehow becomes related. This is also explained. Text 3. Chetragyam chapimam vidhi sarva chetreshu bharata chetragyayor jnanam yattaj jnanamatam mama. O scion of Bharat, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. Purport. While discussing the subject of the body and the knower of the body, the soul and the supersoul, we shall find 3 different topics of study: the Lord, the living entity, and matter. In every field of activities, in every body, there are 2 souls, the individual soul and the supersoul. Because the supersoul is the plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna says, I am also the knower, but I am not the individual knower of the body. I am the super knower. I am present in every body as the Paramatma, or supersoul. One who studies the subject matter of the field of activity and the knower of the field very minutely, in terms of this Bhagavad-Gita, can attain to knowledge. The Lord says, I am the knower of the field of activities in every individual body. The individual may be the knower of his own body, but he is not in knowledge of other bodies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is present as the Supersoul in all bodies, knows everything about all bodies. He knows all the different bodies of all the various species of life. A citizen may know everything about his patch of land, but the king knows not only his palace, but all the properties possessed by the individual citizens. But the Supreme Lord, similarly, one may be the proprietor of the body individually, but the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of all bodies. The king is the original proprietor of the kingdom, and the citizen is the secondary proprietor. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is the supreme proprietor of all bodies. The body consists of the senses. The Supreme Lord is Rishikesha, which means the controller of the senses. He is the original controller of the senses, just as the king is the original controller of all the activities of the state. The citizens are secondary controllers. The Lord says, I am also the knower. This means that he is the super knower. The individual soul knows only his particular body. In the Vedic literature it is stated as follows: Chitrani hi sharirani bijam chapi shubhashubhe tani veti se yogatma tatak chetra giruchate. This body is called the Chetra, and within it dwells the owner of the body and the Supreme Lord, who knows both the body and the owner of the body. Therefore he is called the knower of all fields. The distinction between the field of activities, the knower of activities, and the supreme knower of activities is described as follows. Perfect knowledge of the constitution of the body, the constitution of the individual soul, and the constitution of the supersoul is known in terms of Vedic literature as jnana. That is the opinion of Krishna. To understand both the soul and the supersoul as one, yet distinct, is knowledge. I'll read that again. To understand both the soul and the supersoul as one, yet distinct, is knowledge. One has to understand the position of Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer of nature, and Ishvara, the knower who dominates or controls nature and the individual soul. One should not confuse the three in their different capacities. One should not confuse the painter, the painting, and the easel. This material world, which is the field of activities, is nature, and the enjoyer of nature is the living entity, and above them both is the supreme controller, the personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic language in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, Bhokta Bhogyam Preritaram Chamatva Sarvam Proktam Trividam Brahmanetat. There are three Brahman conceptions. Prakriti is Brahman as the field of activities, and the Jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman, but he is the factual controller. In this chapter, it will also be explained that out of the two knowers, one is fallible and the other is infallible. One is superior and the other is subordinate. One who understands the two knowers of the field to be one and the same contradicts the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who states here very clearly, I am also the knower of the field of activity. One who misunderstands a rope to be a serpent is not in knowledge. There are different kinds of bodies, and there are different owners of the bodies. Because each individual soul has his individual capacity for lording it over material nature, there are different bodies. But the Supreme also is present in them as the controller. The word cha is significant, for it indicates the total number of bodies. That is the opinion of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushana. Krishna is the supersoul, present in each and every body, apart from the individual soul. And Krishna explicitly says here that real knowledge is to know that the supersoul is the controller, is the controller of both the field of activities and the finite enjoyer. Text 4. Tat chetram yach chayadrikcha tad vikari yatascha yat sachayo yat prabhavascha tat samasena me shrinu. Now please hear my brief description of this field of activity and how it is constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who that knower of the field of activities is, and what his influences are. Purport. The Lord is describing the field of activities and the knower of the field of activities in their constitutional positions. One has to know how this body is constituted, the materials of which this body is made, under whose control this body is working, how the changes are taking place, where from the changes are coming, and what the causes are, what the reasons are, what the ultimate goal of the individual soul is, and what the actual form of the individual soul is. One should also know the distinction between the individual living soul and the supersoul, their different influences, their potentials, and so on. One just has to understand this Bhagavad-Gita directly from the description given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all this will be clarified. But one should be careful not to consider the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everybody to be one with the individual soul. the jiva. This is something like equating the potent and the impotent. Text 5. Rishibir Bahuda Gitam Chando Bir Vividai Kritak Brahmasutra Padais Chaiva Hetumad Bir Vinishchita Mishchitahi. That knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding the duality and non-duality of the soul and the supersoul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First he says, this is according to different sages. As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage, and in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parashara, is also a great sage, and he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham Tvam Cha Tatanye. We, you and I, the various other living entities, are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now we are fallen into the ways of the three modes of material nature according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels and some are in the lower nature. The higher and lower natures exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the Supersoul, which is infallible, is uncontaminated by the three qualities of nature and is transcendental. Similarly, the original Vedas, a distinction between the soul, the Supersoul, and the body is made, especially in the Katha Upanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parashara is considered principal among them. The word Chandobi refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Taittiriya Upanishad, for example, which is a branch of the Yajurveda Veda, describes nature, the living entity, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities, and there are two kinds of Kshetrajna, the individual living entity and the supreme living entity. As stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahmapuch Cham Pratishta, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known as Annamaya, dependence on food for existence. This is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. Then, in Pranamaya, after realizing the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. In Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization, called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all-blissful nature. Thus there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, which are called Brahmapuchcham. Out of these, the first 3, Annamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, involve the fields of activities of the living entities. Transcendental to all these fields of activities is the Supreme Lord, who is called Anandamaya. The Vedanta Sutra also describes the Supreme by saying Anandamayopyasad. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Annamaya. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and different from him is the Anandamaya. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field. The living entity is the subordinate knower and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. It is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras or aphorisms are niyad ashute, namat natma shute, and parat to touch chute. The first aphorism indicates the field of activities. The second indicates the living entity. So the first is na viyad ashute. That's the field of activities. The second indicates nat ma shute, the living entity. And the third indicates the Supreme Lord, parat tu yat touch chute, the summum bonum among all the manifestations of various entities. Text 6, 7. Maha bhutanyahankaro buddhir avyaktameva cha indriyani dashaikam cha pancha chendriya gocharaha ichcha dvesha sukham dukham sanghatas chetanadritihi etat chetram samasena savikara udaritam. The five great elements, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses in the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interaction.
You should read that again if you want.
This is heavy,
yeah,
Sankhya
it's
stuff.
Dense, so
very dense.
If you read that one
A little slower, more careful. This is what I'd like to do before I start reading seriously the audiobook for the BBT. I'd like to get the pace down just right and the tone just right.
Well, I think that particular verse is so dense that you could just go very slow.
I think so.
And you people are listening and have to, won't have to catch up.
That's right, that's right.
Or stop it.
So here we go. This is going to be translation text 6 and 7 again. The 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses and the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. Purport. From all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns, and the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. These are the 5 great elements, Mahabhuta. Then there are false ego, intelligence, and the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of nature. Then there are 5 senses for acquiring knowledge, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Then 5 working senses, voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. Then above the senses there is the mind, which is within, and which can be called the sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses altogether. Then there are the 5 objects of the senses: smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now the aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 subjects, then he can very well understand the field of activity. Then there are desire, hatred, happiness, and distress. which are interactions, representations of the 5 great elements in the gross body. The living symptoms, represented by consciousness and convictions, are manifestation of the subtle body, mind, ego, and intelligence. These subtle elements are included within the field of activities. The 5 great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception, or tamasa buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. This further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. The unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhan. One who desires to know the 24 elements in detail, along with their interactions, should study the philosophy in more detail. In Bhagavad-Gita, a summary is given. That's dealt with in the Bhagavatam. Kapila Dev gives a lot of the details. But it's a lot. There's a lot. The body is the representation of all these factors. And there are changes of the body, which are 6 in number. The body is born, it grows, it stays, it produces byproducts, then it begins to decay, and at the last stage it vanishes. Therefore the field is non-permanent, material thing.
Come on back.
Come on in.
Okay.
Hey,
Bharati.
hey.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah.
A piece of floor or a chair, whatever's more comfortable for you. This is Jason.
I remember
I
Jason.
know Jason.
He plays
He
instruments.
plays lots of instruments.
Lots of instruments.
He's also an audio engineer and does recording and stuff like that.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. How are you?
I'm better.
I heard you were ill. Raven told me,
Yeah, really.
but I can't remember what she said.
I had a 48-day typhoid fever.
Oh no.
Oh yes. And I almost left my body.
Oh my God.
Now it's going to take some time for me to come back to. I'm well. The fever's gone. It's been gone for quite some time. But all of the liquid in the body was just sapped by the fever.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have to build it back up again.
Mm.
But I've been doing it already in Houston, so. But what we're going to do now, Jason, is we're going to continue the reading of
Okay,
the
I'm
Gita
sorry.
that we're doing. No. It's really good to see you again.
Oh, I just woke up.
We're reading chapter 13. And chapter 13 is a very succinct, almost sutric explanation of the Sankhya philosophy of Lord Kapila Dev, Krishna's incarnation as the greatest sage ever. And he describes the Sankhya philosophy, the analytical study of the elements of the material world, how they're put together, what the purpose is, what the source is, and what the destination of the enjoyer is, because the enjoyer is inside this whole elaborate, complex material nature. We're on text 8 to 12. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, chantir arjavam, acharyo pasanam shocham, stairam atma vinigraha, indriyarteshu vairagyam, anahankara evacha, janma mrityu jadavyadi, dukkha doshanudarshanam, asaktir anabhishyankam, asaktir anabhishvanga, putradhara grihadishu, nityam sasamachit. Nityam sasamachittatvam ishtat nishto patishtishu papatishu maya chananyam yogena bhaktir avyabhicharani vivikta deshase vitvam aratir janasangshadi adhyatma jnananityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam etaj jnanam iti proktam ajnanam yadato yata. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. Purport. This process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of 24 elements, and the process of knowledge, as described here, is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mai chanyanya yogena bhaktir abhyabhicharini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach, or is not able to approach, the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Yasyasti Bhaktir Bhagavat Yakinchana Sarvaya Gunais Tatra Samasate Suraha. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor or dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. Non-violent is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually non-violence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people, so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is nonviolence. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlad, who, only 5 years old, was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlad tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth, even to an enemy. As for acceptance of the spiritual master, that is essential, because without the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility and offer him all services, so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because a bona fide spiritual master is a representative of Krishna, if he bestows any blessings upon his disciple, that will make the disciple immediately advanced without the disciples following the regulative principles. Or the regulative principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. Cleanliness is essential for making spiritual advancement in spiritual life, for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. And self-control means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. The senses are so strong that they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands, which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit, so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. The most important and uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of the tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, the tongue should always be engaged in tasting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. As far as the eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. As far as that will control the eyes. Similarly, the ears should be engaged in hearing about Krishna, and the nose in smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This is the process of devotional service, and it is understood here that Bhagavad-Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective. Unintelligent commentators in the Bhagavad-Gita try to divert the mind of the reader to other subjects, But there is no other subject in Bhagavad-Gita than devotional service. False ego means accepting this body as oneself. When one understands that he is not his body and his spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in the liberated stage of self-realization. This sense of I am is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to this false body, it is false ego. When the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother, its suffering, and so on, are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful, because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother. We do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings, and they are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed. Materialists, they don't want to discuss these things. No way. I'm not going to.
You're not going to be life as a party.
Yeah,
I want to talk about death. I just read this whole thing about death.
Yeah. Have you noticed how much we're suffering all the time, no matter what we try to do, even having a party? As far as diseases and old age are concerned, oh my God, what just happened to me? As far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be diseased, and no one wants to become old, but there is no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there is no impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna. Have some discussion on books like Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These 4 things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness following these 4 principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life. Because in this world, no one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Prabhupada. So expert. So expert, yeah. But the way it came at the end of all that is just far out, far out. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad-Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy. And when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respect, and so on, as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema, going or enjoying some social function, because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad-Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad-Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the supersoul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the supersoul cannot be one, at least not in the bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. This service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, as it is clearly stated here. So bhakti, or devotional service, is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is explained. Vidanti tat tat vavidas tatvam yaj jnanam advayam. Those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized, self in capital letter self, is realized in 3 different phases, as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is perfect, that is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the Supreme Truth, the Absolute Personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second floor, or the third floor, and so on. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. Hare Krishna. So tonight I'm going to stop early because I haven't eaten yet and I have to take something. Maybe you can help me out in that regard. Big-
time is it?
8 o'clock.
I'll buy you dinner.
Yeah, you're so kind.
Are you gonna go to the restaurant?
I don't think so. I think I'm going to stay here.
Okay, well,
My body is
so,
so,
bring you something.
my body's so sensitive when I get into big social things. I mean, it's not because of what
No.
it just said here. I'm not
Sure.
so elevated, but I do like to be alone. To tell you
Yeah.
the truth. To tell you the truth,
Sure.
it is nice. But I want to eat something up here.
Okay, do you want me to bring you something?
Yes.
Okay.
Thought you'd never
I
ask.
gotta run home and get my wallet, I'm right there, so.
You don't have to get a wallet at all. Just go, or
Oh.
are you going to take yourself?
I don't need to, I don't need anything.
So just go down to Daraja.
Okay,
Tell him you're
Gotcha.
getting, and he'll make it up and
okay,
bring it up here.
okay. Put it on your tab.
Put it on the tab.
Sure, yeah, we'll do, why don't I, go get that.
Thank you very much.
I'm so glad you're here.
You wanna stop the recording?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stop this recording.
I'm so glad I'm